postcodes, from the oldest to the newest, from the smallest to the biggest. Every household and every business up and down the country has a unique postcode. In the 1850s, a committee on street names was established to consider renaming the streets of London, but the plan did not meet with universal approval, especially not from wealthier families who lived in streets named after an ancestor. Not everyone, however, was against the changes, and by the end of 1871, some 100,000 houses had been renumbered and 4,800 areas renamed. To accelerate further the delivery of mail in London, Sir Rowland Hill proposed a solution which involved dividing the capital into 10 separate postal districts. The districts would be denoted by the compass points and an office established in each district. The original 10 districts, EC, Eastern Central, WC, Western Central, and then NW, N, NE, E, SE, S, SW and W were contained within a circle of 12 miles radius from central London. The public were asked to add the district's initials to the end of an address. Hill's plan was authorised in 1856 and implemented during 1857 and 1858. The scheme accelerated the circulation of London's mail, particularly local letters, which could now be sorted in the local office instead of having to be taken to the chief office in the centre of London. In 1866, following a report by surveyor Anthony Trollope, better known today as a novelist, NE was not considered viable and was merged with the East District, or E. 2 years later, S was abolished and divided between SE and SW. In the 1860s, London was followed by other large towns. The initial of the town name was used, M for Manchester and S for Sheffield, for example, followed by a number to indicate the geographical district. Liverpool was the first provincial town to be divided into districts. Western, Eastern, Northern and Southern districts were created in 1864. Manchester followed with 8 districts in 1867-68, and by the early 1930s Dublin, Sheffield, Birmingham, Bristol, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, Newcastle and Brighton had joined the schemes. During the First World War, the London system was further refined by dividing the districts into sub-districts, still in use today. These were introduced to assist temporary staff who had taken over the sorting work from employees who had joined the armed services. They had less knowledge of the districts and the longer serving staff they replaced. The sub-districts were each given a serial number, such as SW6 for Fulham. These formed a suffix for the district's initials and were allocated in sequence. For example, the Eastern District offices was E1, Bethnal Green, E2, Bow, A3 and so on. The first postcodes were introduced on a trial basis in Norwich in 1959. With the first 3 characters of the code, NOR, representing the name of the city, and the last 3 characters a particular street. Larger firms and businesses received their own individual codes. However, the trial was not as successful as expected. Less than half of all letters posted bore the codes, and it was found that a greater division of the last 3 characters was needed. By the early 60s, the Post Office had started a major mechanisation programme designed to overcome the problems of labour-intensive sorting. The introduction of mechanical sorting depended on reducing the address to a machine-readable form, a code printed on the letter in phosphor dots which could be sensed by sorting equipment. A postcode system was developed from the Norwich trials, and the present system was introduced at Croydon in 1966. The task of coding the whole country was carried out in stages and was finally completed in 1974 with the recoding of Norwich. The current postcode consists of 2 main elements: the outward code, needed to sort from one town to another, and the inward code, required to sort within the town. Taking the postcode POW3AX for example, the outward code PO1 divides it into area PO, of which there are 121 in the UK, and the District 1, there being approximately 20 postcode districts in an area. The inward code 3AX divides into Sector 3 with approximately 300 addresses in a sector, and the unit AX with about 15 addresses per unit. In 1985, after successful trials at Mount Pleasant, the optical character recognition or OCR system was introduced nationally. The system automatically reads the postcode on printed addresses and prints the appropriate phosphorus dots onto the envelope. It replaces the need for an operator to key in the postcode and can handle letters at a much greater rate. Further updates have come in time, including video coding, but basically the system as it was completed in 1974 still operates to this day. If somebody gives you a postcode in this country, you can pretty much work out where it's going to be. If somebody says it's in PO, then you probably know it's going to be in Portsmouth. If they say B, it's going to be in Birmingham. So you can pretty much guess from a postcode where the address is. Whereas with the zip codes, it's a number and you cannot do that. So let's move over to talk about the zip codes. Over to Jeff and he'll explain how they work.
Hello everyone, it's Jeff again, and I would like to tell you a little bit of today about an iconic figure from my childhood, Mr. Zip. I was born in the spring of 1963, which was about the same time that they implemented zip codes here in the United States. And the iconic figure that you saw everywhere in my youth was Mr. Zip. He was on a flag in front of the post office. He was in the post office windows. He was on cute little stickers that you used to get on your mail. From 1963 until the mid-1970s, Mr. Zip was everywhere. I am definitely old enough to remember the plywood figure standing in front of the post office, telling people to remember to put zip codes on their list. The post office had decided very early on that their only hope of getting everyone to use zip codes was to appeal to the younger people that was mailing letters. They pretty much figured that people that had been mailing letters all their lives would not start using zip codes just because the post office wanted them to. So the idea was to roll out this comical little character that would get all of the young people to start using zip codes. And he actually had a very interesting beginning. Mr. Zip was based on an original design by Howard Wilcox, son of a letter carrier and a member of the Cunningham and Walsh Advertising Agency. Wilcox's design was a childlike sketch of a postman delivering a letter. The figure was used only a few times initially, and then it was filed away and lost. Later, when AT&T bought out the advertising agency, they gave it to the post office at no cost because they thought that it was very clever. Miami-based post office department artist Joe Lawrence retained the face, but sharpened the limbs and the torso and added the small mailbag. The new figure, who Lawrence dubbed Mr. Zip, was unveiled at a convention of postmasters in October 1962. This gentleman right here was probably more responsible for us adopting zip codes than anyone else. His name was Robert Moon, and he is considered the father of zip code. He submitted a proposal in 1944 while working as a postal inspector. He was very concerned about the numbers of inexperienced and new people taking the place of letter carriers and letter sorters for people who had been drafted to fight in World War II. An earlier idea had been worked on where the large cities like New York and Chicago and San Francisco and St. Louis would number each post office, and when a person wrote a letter to someone in those cities, they would say Minneapolis 16 or New York 42, and the letter would go to that individual post office which put the letter closer to the person ultimately that it was addressed to. But it didn't really help that much. It didn't speed the process, and there was still tons of errors. So they had to come up with a way of stretching it out a little bit. And that's where Robert Moon came in, because he proposed having 3 number zip codes. The 3-digit zip code would describe the sectional center facility. It would be a central mail processing facility, and it would put the letter within 3 states of the person receiving it. This worked for a while, but the post office decided that if they added a 4th and 5th digit, it could get the letter even closer. This idea was proposed by Henry Hahn Sr. Because nowadays mail is sorted by computer, the way that the zip codes work is the first digit gets it in the general vicinity of where it's going. And then for the next sort, the second digit gets it even closer. And then the final sort is the 3rd digit. The 3rd digit gets it on a truck to within 3 or 4 cities of ultimately where it's going. The 5-digit system is basically what we have now, although later on they added the +4, which gets it within your neighborhood. Basically, that's a rip-off idea of the British system, which is far superior to ours. I think that we should have adopted the British system at some point. It's so intuitive. On several occasions, I have asked Gabriel where something was in England, and he said, well, what's the postal code? And I told him, and he said, oh, well, that's North London. And just from the postal code, if you told me postal code 67138, I have no idea where that is. It's as intuitive as an anvil. I believe the post office was correct putting the little stickers on letters of old people to remind them to use zip codes. I distinctly remember letters being in our mail because my mother would forget to put postal codes on letters. I hope you have enjoyed our little walk through my childhood with Mr. Zip today. And now you know more than you ever really wanted to know about American zip codes. And I leave you in front of the iconic Flatiron Building in 1920, which is a future subject I am going to tell you a story about, because the Flatiron Building has a very interesting story, but that is for another day. I leave you now with the original Mr. Zip. Remember, everyone, be good to each other, do good deeds, think good thoughts, and I will see you on another adventure. Bye, everyone.